LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, the surprising benefits of appreciating the interesting. I'm not sure where you are right now. Maybe you're walking your dog, driving to work, squeezing avocados in a grocery store. But whatever you're doing, some of you may have an extra bounce in your step because of the outcome of the recent election. And some of you may feel despondent, hopeless, angry at the world. In either case, there is nothing we can do about it. The world, I've noticed, resists our attempts to control it. But there is a silver lining. Even when the world is upside down, maybe especially when the world is upside down, it remains fascinating. It's almost more interesting when it's not behaving the way we think it should. Taking an interest in the world is, in this sense, a kind of insurance policy. When it's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's interesting. This outlook has helped me psychologically throughout my life. You can imagine my surprise at discovering that my guest today, the philosopher Lorraine Besser, just wrote a book making precisely this case. It's called The Art of the Interesting: What We Miss in Our Pursuit of the Good Life and How to Cultivate It. For thousands of years, philosophers have been arguing about the good life, what it looks like, how to live it. For just a few decades, scientists have been looking more systematically at what actually leads to a life of flourishing. And only very recently have they begun to collaborate. Lorraine, a philosophy professor at Middlebury, partnered with psychologist Shige Oshii to explore the tantalizing possibility that our pursuit of happiness and our pursuit of meaning don't paint a full picture of the constituent parts of a rich and beautiful life. The critical third missing element is what Lorraine calls the interesting, capital T, capital I. What is the interesting, and how do we get more of it? Let's ask Lorraine.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by SAP. SAP Business AI. Embedded across SAP solutions, it drives immediate impact. From Joule, your digital assistant, to AI-powered capabilities portfolio-wide, make confident decisions using your own data. SAP Business AI. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
I'm Tomer Cohen, LinkedIn's Chief Product Officer. In my new podcast, Building One, I interview some of the best product builders out there. People at the intersection of dreaming and building and learning. Together, you and I will learn from their experiences. If you're just as curious as I am, follow Building One wherever you listen, and check out the conversation on LinkedIn.
Hi, Rufus.
Hello, Lorraine. So nice to meet you. I decided I had to put on an interesting shirt for
I
this
love it.
conversation, particularly after reading your section on your youthful travels to India. Oh my gosh, Lorraine, I'm so looking forward to this. You know, as it happens, every time I see a green Vermont license plate, my eyes mist over. I spent 10 summers at a beautiful summer camp up in Vermont, driving all the back roads. I was a hack of a ski racer in college and share your love of sailing. And I have 3 teenage boys.
Ooh, wow, we are just in the same.
How old are your boys?
They are now 19 and 17.
Oh my gosh, we're 19, 16, 14.
It is just crazy, huh?
It's not JV, it's varsity parenting, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Imagine that I've just said all kinds of wonderful things about you and your career and your book. And you're just basking in the afterglow of my flattering introduction.
Awesome. I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm with you. I've been listening
Excellent.
to you
Here we
all
go.
morning. It feels very good. Anyways, yeah, go ahead.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful, fabulous. Okay, here we go. Lorraine Besser, welcome to the next big idea.
Thank you, Rufus. I'm really looking forward to being here.
Lorraine, there are many people right now who are excited about the results of this recent election. And there are others, many of whom I'm close to, who are despondent, gutted, struggling right now. In moments of challenge in my own personal life, I've always found it helpful to say, well, it's definitely not boring. This is an interesting moment to be alive. And I find this has a kind of buoying effect, as if the mindset of appreciating the interesting is a form of lithium or a kind of mood stabilizer. Is this one of the benefits you see of appreciating the interesting in our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're thinking about things being interesting and appreciating when they are interesting, we're really tapping into a different part of our minds. We're pausing for a second from that part that is just evaluating and thinking about all the bad stuff, and we're giving ourselves a break and observing from this curious perspective. And so that is, I think, just so important, especially when we are dealing with a difficult situation that we can't control at the moment. And it's really helpful to do. We say it all the time in our house when things are just crazy. It's never boring, and it makes things better.
Yeah, the world can be irritatingly oblivious to our preferences,
Yeah.
I've noticed, right? None of us are in control, apparently. And I think a lot of people feel deeply frustrated by this lack of control. But this simple shift to appreciating, how fascinating it all is, it kind of offers this silver lining in everything if you choose to see it.
Yeah, and you're nailing it, right? If you choose to see things as interesting and choose to bring that sense of curiosity to our experiences rather than just evaluating everything, then it'll really change our situations and it'll allow us to engage with difficult stuff, difficult times. And over time, this kind of short periods of engagement and bringing up the interesting in our minds is really going to pay off in a large way. What we know from research is that the more moments of psychological richness and interesting experiences we can experience, over time, they build up and really enhance our lives. They allow us to interact with the world more fully, and we develop this amazing sense of self-expansion simply by calling to mind this other state of our mind and our ability just to bring curiosity to something instead of always to try to control it or to get frustrated when we can't control it and all of that cycle. It's really important to try to achieve things and to try to do things when you can. But the reality is that we can't control everything. We're going to have setbacks. We're going to have frustrations. And the best thing that we can do is recognize that we can't control everything and not to get really stressed out and bummed when we can't. And yet instead to kind of flip that switch and just maybe be curious about the situation.
It's interesting. I have always thought about this as the sort of the artistic sensibility. I've always had in my mind that I occupy different modalities. One of them is the sort of artistic sensibility. And what I've always loved about that mindset is that I've thought of it as not unlike a day trader on Wall Street. If a day trader on Wall Street is effective, he or she is making money when the market goes down, and they're making money when the market goes up. And an artist can, in theory, see beauty in pain and beauty in challenge. And that's an empowering mindset to be able to occupy, right? I don't know that we want to be in that mindset all the time, but it's what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great parallel for what I'm getting at here. So when we think from an aesthetic framework and we try to take in the beauty around us, what we're doing there is really, again, pausing, and we're noticing things in our environment, and we're, in the case of artistic experience, right, we're seeing things in a way that helps us appreciate how they kind of come together and create a beautiful thing. And the mindset that'll deliver us the interesting experiences is very similar because it involves pausing, noticing what's going on without us. And then the distinctive thing about the interesting is to bring that sense of curiosity to our current experience and to let just see where our minds go with that.
Now, one possible response to your book is, well, of course, we should be appreciating what's interesting about the world. I don't need to be convinced of this. Do you think people need convincing? Do you see evidence that people don't fully take advantage of the benefits of this kind of outlook on the world? What are people missing? What's your thesis?
Yeah, I think what people are missing is that this is actually a really important part of the good life. A lot of what I'm talking about will sound familiar to many of us, yet we don't always appreciate what's happening as part of what makes our lives go better. We are taught by society, by everything we hear and read, that we should be going for happy experiences or we should be finding meaning in life. And yet this whole range of experiences we now know really enhances our life, and we should give it priority. So I think people come at this from very different directions. For some, I've heard that it's really affirming because it just speaks to something that they've kind of sensed, and now they have a name for it, a label, and now they're justified in prioritizing it. Everyone's on a spectrum, and at another end are those of us who get very caught up in these kind of cycles of pursuing meaning and then just crashing and going for happiness, easy pleasures. And it's just a cycle that continues. And when we're in that cycle, we're not making space for interesting experiences.
What some people would call the happy life, a philosopher might call the good life. And I noticed that in your book, you actually capitalize the G and the L, the good life. And the good life is a thing in philosophy, and you are a philosopher. Can you tell us about the good life? What is the good life? Why does this matter? Is the pursuit of the good life at the core of what we're trying to do as philosophers?
The nature of the good life has been at the core of what philosophers have thought about for ages. And the way that I carve out the good life, or the way that I think about it, is a life full of the most rewarding experiences. Experiences shape our lives, they form our lives. And so we have a good life when we have really rewarding experiences in them.
A lot of people look down their noses at self-help as a genre, but I think it's kind of interesting that we have been engaged in the act of trying to help ourselves navigate the world more successfully for thousands of years, right? And this is really at the core objective of many of what we think of as the greatest thinkers among the ancients. How do you think about who are some of the most influential ancient philosophers or ancient thinkers for you?
Yeah, Aristotle is the number one ancient philosopher for me. So Aristotle is the first one to really take this question seriously, like, what is the good life? And he identifies these two forms of good life that have really influenced us, right? So there's one way of living well for him was going to be all about happiness and pleasure. And another way, though, that he points out is a way that characterizes more of what is distinctive about us, and that's living a life where we really flourish as human beings. And for him, that meant using our rational capacities. And he calls this eudaimonia. It's what we now think of broadly in terms of like meaning and purpose. And Aristotle first laying out these two forms of the good life have just so shaped how it is that we've thought about the good life. Yet what we're realizing now is that perhaps those categories are too narrow, right? That there's more out there to the good life, and that we need other things beyond happiness and meaning. And what new research is showing is that psychological richness delivers that third missing piece to the good life that we just hadn't really recognized sufficiently before.
And psychological richness as a topic is a new interest at the intersection, would you say, of psychology and philosophy? And you've been instrumental in working in this new field.
Yeah. So I have been working with a psychologist, Shige Oshii, and he is the one who initially brought this project to me. He thought that there was this range of experiences that were different from happiness and meaning and that really enhanced our lives. And so together, he sought me out to help really carve out these theoretical dimensions of it. And what we did together was look both empirically at the level of psychological research, asking people things, studying what they are finding important in life, and then trying to figure out what they have in common and what value that they have. And that leads me to emphasize the interesting, which is the value that we experience when we have experiences that deliver this form of psychological richness.
Right. So you say that, many of us are chasing happiness or pleasure, and others are chasing meaning or purpose. And these are things we talk about frequently. And I think you're making the case here that pursuing the interesting has advantages over both of these other pursuits. Let's talk a little bit about the other two to begin. What's wrong with the pursuit of pleasure? I happen to like pleasure.
I do too. I am, it is an important part of life. And when we can experience pleasure, I feel like we should just go for it and let it in and enjoy our moments of pleasure. The problem is that our experiences of pleasure are bounded by our basic physiology, and that these moments of pleasure, when we find them, they're just not going to stick around for very long. And often, it's very tempting to get into this cycle of saying, oh, that was great. How can I get that again? And just to get in this cycle. But it's really never going to culminate in any kind of lasting state of happiness or pleasure that you're seeking.
I find the word happiness to be irritatingly fuzzy. Like, I think I tend to include in happiness gratification and fulfillment, but one can also define and talk about happiness like it's cotton candy. There's sort of, I think there's semantic nuance there, but it certainly is the case that you talk about this, and we've had many other wonderful guests on the show talking about how pleasure is designed to be short-lived. Some psychologists call this the hedonic set point. And the queen of the hedonic set point, in my mind, is Dr. Anna Lembke from Stanford, who we had on the show. And one of the great takeaways from that conversation was that if we want to optimize our experiences of joy and happiness, it's often best to invite pain into our lives, to choose the discomfort and pain, because on the other side of it is satisfaction and joy. That we have, this irritating hedonic set point causes us, when we pursue immediate gratification and pleasure, we end up very irritated and unhappy. But the reverse is true. It's possible to do it better, she would argue.
Yeah, I support that. I totally agree with it. One of the things I've learned in my years studying happiness is that the best way to get it is not to pursue it directly, right? So you look for these different strategies of helping yourself to more easily experience pleasure. And I certainly agree with that by taking a pause from just like shooting for the dopamine, for the burst there, and by recognizing that it gets balanced out and maybe to go on the other end. So that, I think that's a great strategy. I don't think that it's going to fill, even when we really master that strategy, I don't think that pleasure is the kind of thing that can fill our lives completely, nor do I think that we really want it to. And so, there are other things that are really important. And you're absolutely right that words like happiness are used in many different ways. And a lot of them include a lot of times we think about maybe like authentic happiness that includes more than pleasure and includes this other stuff. And I think even just part of how that word has morphed shows us that pleasure is just destined to play a limited role for us, right? It's not going to fill it out. And I don't think many of us would want it to fill out our lives completely.
So you've established that pleasure is not a worthy goal, a worthy direct target. And I don't think this is a surprising argument probably for most listeners. But here's something more surprising. You say that the pursuit of purpose and meaning should not be our primary goal.
Yeah.
What do you have against pursuing a meaningful life?
I think there are 3 legs to the good life. So happiness, meaning, and psychological richness. These are all really important aspects of the good life. So I don't want to underwrite the importance of meaning in our lives. But I think here is again a situation where if we understand how the search for purpose taps into a part of us that is so very focused on the pursuit and the end goal that it blocks everything else out. And the problem is that it doesn't always feel so great when we achieve things, right? It's not this lasting sense of accomplishment that we get, even when we achieve the most valuable things that we worked for. It just doesn't end in this place that we imagine it will. And these are part of how we respond to things that we need to know about ourselves.
You are a professor at Middlebury. It undoubtedly took a lot of time in what you call pursuit mode to achieve what you've achieved at your station as a successful college professor. Would you do it differently if you did it again? And actually, this could be an opportunity to share a little bit of your personal journey. You actually share very candidly in your book about a tough time in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So over the course of my career, right, we have these huge milestones called tenure. And if you think about different levels of achievement, this is like a clear, tangible achievement that you have a job for the rest of your life. And certainly for me, when I was really starting out before I had tenure, I took it, I prioritized it, I focused on it. And towards the end, I really looked back, even just right around when I was about to achieve it, it really became clear to me that my life had been impoverished. So one thing that had happened during the course of that time, and even just right about the time I was about to get tenure, was that my first marriage failed. That struck me at the same year that all these other amazing things were happening. So I got divorced the same year I received tenure, the same year I published my first book. So there's all of these different kind of huge achievements that I'd been striving for so long. And yet going through a divorce is just a clear sign that your life has been impoverished, right? Something has gone astray there. And for me, the combination of these two things happening at once taught me a really important lesson about what happens when you are in pursuit mode for so long. You just really ignore all the other aspects of yourselves, because I had forgotten all about all the other parts of me in this course to just achieve and pursue this one thing. So the amazing combination of achieving what I'd always wanted, feeling very impoverished at the result, and then having this kind of shock to try to realize what had gone wrong really led me to a very pivotal experience of trying to reconnect with myself. And this didn't mean that I stopped trying to achieve and write books and teach well and all of those things, but it just meant that I took time to think about what I was really interested in and what I was passionate about, and then to prioritize those experiences. And my life has certainly been better off since then.
You quote in the book Ryan Holiday, who we've had on the show, who says, "How does it feel to accomplish everything you wanted in life, to accomplish it earlier than you expected? I can tell you, it feels like nothing." Most of us don't stop believing on some level that a certain set of accomplishments will cause us to arrive at a place of satisfaction where the world is coming to us and gratification is coming to us in an endless stream. If I only can accomplish A, B, and C, everything will just, be marvelous from then on. And yet there's such overwhelming evidence that that's not the case.
Yeah. So one of the things you're tapping into is the arrival fallacy. Dan Gilbert's done a lot of great work on this, and it is this exact same experience you're describing, where you think at the end of all of this that you will arrive at this place of satisfaction and fulfillment, and we don't. It just never feels the way we think it will. Part of that, for Gilbert's explanation, part of that is that we're really just bad at predicting the impact of things on our emotions. But I think there's also a real component there, which is that arriving at an end goal, no matter how valuable, isn't a very fulfilling experience. And I think, partly because what it means is an end to all of this pursuit and all of this process that you've developed, and partly because we expect it to be just this moment of pure satisfaction. I love the quote by Ryan Holiday about it's just not, right? It just feels like nothing. And
Yeah.
I am aware of this. So when I have something big come out, I really try to help myself feel something. You know, when this book came out,
Wow.
for example, and one thing I do try to do is to, at least being aware of the kind of arrival fallacy and the difficulties we have.
Yeah.
It points me back to the importance of really finding fulfillment within the process of these things, within the writing, within the what I get to read, what I get to think about, right? But the more I think that we can focus on finding fulfillment in the processes, then we'll be better able to experience fulfillment overall.
I've been accused, Lorraine, on this show of being a maximalist, which is to say of wanting it all. And I plead guilty to that to some degree. But I think in the Venn diagram between the interesting, the meaningful, and even the happy, joyful parts of our lives, I like to think that there is overlap and these things can be mutually reinforcing. Having said that, though, it does strike me that there's a trade-off between these different modalities to some degree, right? One of the things that I find most rewarding about having access to this kind of isn't the world interesting mindset is that it's a non-judgmental mindset. Right. It's a mode in which I'm taking in information about the world. It's an important part of kind of the intellectual journey of trying to figure out what's true about how to build your business, how to interact with other people. It's a curious mode, but it's not necessarily a mode of taking action. Listeners to this show know that I love the line from E.B. White. I rise in the morning torn between a desire to savor the world and save the world, and it makes it hard to plan the day. I think I got that right.
Yeah.
Right. But there's but it feels to me like we do sometimes have to shift. I know you like to drive your stick shift car in the curvy roads of Vermont. We sometimes need to shift gears between these modalities. Does it feel that way to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And so really important to do both, right? We need to savor our experiences. And I love that way of thinking about how to just open our eyes up to what's going on with us, to our experiences, and allowing them to really hit us for what they are without bringing that evaluative perspective to it. And the more that we are focused on that evaluative structure, the harder it does become to savor things. And so I think the ability to recognize when you are savoring and when you are saving and be able to flip the switches when you can, right? When you notice, well, okay, this is a really pressing matter. I need to focus on this aspect right now, to recognize when that's over, right? And then to flip that switch and say, okay, well, yeah, let me now savor what it is out there. Let me notice things. Let me experience them.
We had Jonathan Haidt, the great social psychologist, on the show recently, and he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. And he makes the case there that when we're judgmental, it blocks our ability to fully understand the world. And so this strikes me as a secondary benefit of appreciating the interesting, which is when we are suspending judgment and just kind of fascinated, whether it's with another person or with a situation. We're both more receptive to what is fascinating about a given individual or a given topic, and we're also more able to take in all the complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this aspect of understanding that derives even from just again, pausing, not evaluating everything and taking it in. For an interesting experience to arise, right, we just need to be able to stop evaluating things and notice things and then let them sink. And while we're not necessarily aiming at an understanding of the world, when we do that, when we engage in an interesting experience, we find our mind shifted, right? We find our perspective just a little bit shifted. And I think the best explanation of this is because we have developed a greater understanding of our experience of our current environment, and we've been able to develop that simply because we're bringing an open mind to it.
Tired of AI hype without results? SAP Business AI isn't just talk. It's embedded across SAP solutions, driving immediate impact for your organization. From Joule, your digital assistant, to AI-powered capabilities throughout the SAP portfolio, SAP Business AI helps you make confident decisions based on your own data, all while maintaining the highest security and privacy standards for growth-focused businesses. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
What can we do to be better at appreciating the interesting? How can we help people spend more time in this frame of mind?
There are a number of different things. And I think that it starts with really tapping into your own experiences of what the interesting feels like. So we all have different minds and different backgrounds and different thoughts. And so what we find interesting is going to be unique and really our own experience. And we can learn from the research. We can learn from its correlations. So we know that interesting experiences will arise in conditions of novelty, challenge, or complexity. So we can put ourselves and allow ourselves to be more comfortable in some of those situations. And if we've experienced the interesting and we can kind of feel its sparks arising, then we are, even when we're in a complex or challenging situation, we can recognize that our mind is about to do something really extraordinary, and then we can let it. So it's a combination of tapping into the feeling and being open to bringing an open mind to our experiences and not running away from the challenging or complex things, and just allowing it to sit with us and to, again, bring that curiosity to it and let it develop.
It's so interesting. I learned relatively recently that that I think I suffer from what I consider to be a delightful condition that some people refer to disparagingly as attention deficit disorder. I prefer to call it novelty bias.
I love it.
or absent-minded professor brain, if you prefer. I figured this out about myself when I discovered that there were two defining characteristics or symptoms. Distractibility, an attraction to novelty, well, check. But then hyperfocus. Yeah. That once you've identified something that fascinates you, you obsess, you focus on that thing to such a degree that you can't hear people talking to you. And when I learned about that second symptom, I said, oh gosh, maybe this is me, right? Now, what's great about it is that the interesting presents itself all the time. What's not as great about it is that the interesting presents itself at times when perhaps it should not. And so I feel like I'm have exposure both to what's wondrous about living in a constantly interesting world and the liabilities of that, which is why I come back to this notion that there's value in shifting modalities and having access to, a sequence of different modalities. Maybe some people have an underdeveloped appreciation for the interesting. Maybe others have an underdeveloped ability to sustain, pursuit mode, for extended time. So what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that we have different relationships with our ability to shift between these modalities?
Oh, absolutely. And I am so familiar with hyperfocus, and I get that it does start from this place of novelty, and yet there is a mode that certainly I can get into where it just becomes all consuming about this one thing. And knowing that about myself, right, I can try to work with it, right, to know that, okay, if something's really interesting to me, then I'll be able to easily engage with it, yet also recognizing when it's time to come out. So I talk a lot about recognizing the signs of, when your mind is too tired and when you are no longer getting a benefit from that experience. At a certain point after hyperfocus, it does not feel good, right? You're drained, you're exhausted. And I think the better we are at knowing our tendencies and then recognizing when we need to shift gears and stop before we get to the really draining aspect of it, that'll help us really reap the benefits of novelty without going too far in. Yet, of course, everyone's minds are different. Other folks will have trouble landing on it, right? Will have trouble kind of like landing on something to let it develop. And So there are different skills that person will need to pay attention to. And I talk a lot about developing the skill of noticing, which I describe as a particular kind of mindfulness, in that it's non-evaluative and it's an awareness, yet it's directed outside of yourself. So you're bringing this form of non-evaluative understanding, awareness to your experiences. And that's going to help particularly for individuals who really do struggle to land on things.
In your book, you call this mindfulness 2.0. Can you tell us what mindfulness 2.0 is? And I'm curious also about your take on mindfulness as it's traditionally defined.
Yeah. So I'll start with the take on mindfulness as it's traditionally defined. So mindfulness in its origin is it's metacognitive awareness of your thoughts and reactions, so that you can learn to sit with it and be aware of those reactions without kind of emotionally engaging with things. But one thing that happens when we just kind of talk too much about mindfulness in a more general context is that I think that it leads some people, at least, to feel like they shouldn't emotionally react to things. And I worry about that separation of just thinking, okay, well, I need to be able to think without allowing my emotions to impact my experiences. So mindfulness 2.0 is going to be using those same skills of developing this non-evaluative awareness of things, but doing it as a way of starting engagement that you will then allow just to flow. It's a cycle of thoughts and emotions it is that cycle that really generates an interesting experience. Yet you can't be afraid to emotionally react. And so thinking about mindfulness 2.0 as this form is noticing, as a prompt for interesting experiences, as a place to start, but then to allow our emotions to kick in, I think that's where we'll get the real benefits of that skill for the interesting.
One of the things that's fascinating reading your book is how differently we all define what is interesting. And you have a wonderful passage where you share a number of what I believe to be statements of fact that are perhaps a way that that listeners now might test what they find to be interesting. Here's your sequence of facts. And you can tell me, if these are not facts, you can tell me so at the end. Hawaii has the most beautiful rainbows. Lemons float, but limes sink. Before becoming an actor, Christopher Walken was a lion tamer in the circus. Mount Everest is taller now than it used to be. The circulatory system of a human being is more than 60,000 miles long. Steve Martin was a philosophy major. Tiger shark embryos start attacking each other while in their mother's womb. Actor Daniel Radcliffe broke more than 80 wands while filming the Harry Potter movies. Okay, so these things are all true, I take it.
I believe they're true, yes.
Well, I see. Okay, right. Because the Hawaii most beautiful rainbow sounds a little subjective, but maybe there's some science to that.
I think
perhaps.
There's some science to the colors there, but yes. But the others are facts, and I love this list. Every time I go through that list, it's actually something different every time that's sparking me, and I offer the list as a way both to learn, how to develop that spark and recognize it within you, but also as a way of recognizing that what we'll find interesting is unique to us, and it also might vary over time. And so I think it's a great way to kind of just practice how it is that something can spark us, and then just to kind of run with that. Like that fact about the circulatory system is killing me right now. That's just, I don't understand at all.
No, it's I played squash this morning with a new friend who said that I told him about your book, and he said, I am obsessed right now with the diaries, the first-person accounts of Civil War soldiers. And I thought, that is so oddly specific. And it never occurred to me to doggedly pursue everything, all the first-person accounts of soldiers in the Civil War. But I can understand why this was actually very powerful for him. But, there's just such an incredible breadth of interesting things to be discovered. But to be aware of what's interesting, one of the things you say we need to do is to maybe get ourselves out of these kinds of automatic, habitual mindsets that we're often in, right? And maybe you can speak to what's happening neurochemically or what the science is behind this. But we know that when we, say, drive to work, we all have this experience of like just arriving at your destination and you stop paying attention to the turns. You've done it so many times. You're no longer processing this as a novel experience, right? Whereas if you move to a new town and you drive to work for the first time, every turn will be novel and surprising. And obviously there's an efficiency to this ability of our brains to render things automatic. It frees up space and time to do other work that is probably valuable. But so how do you think about this trade-off between automatic mode and novelty awareness mode?
Yeah, I think, our brain's ability to make things so automatic is remarkable and so important because we can't be thinking about everything all of the time. Yet we also have to recognize the way in which our mind is striving to do this whenever it can. And I think that, it's one thing not to have to pay attention to the basics of driving a car. It's another thing to allow yourself to just, without thinking about it, end up somewhere. And I've done it. I know how that goes. And sometimes I will deliberately then take another route to work, right? We can recognize when it's benefiting us and allow that to happen for sure, but also recognize when it's going too far and leaving us really checked out from our experiences and just do something very little to change it up, and that'll stimulate our minds.
I'm particularly fond of the unexpectedly interesting, right? These sort of like fascinating moments that emerge in our days, right? But one has to be receptive to them, or maybe even in pursuit of the interesting. When I think of unexpectedly interesting moments, is I was in my 20s and I think in Venice Beach in California, outside of a beautiful cafe, beautiful sunny day, and there was a beautiful young woman, walking into this cafe with a bouquet of flowers, and something came over me and I said, if you gave me those flowers, I would never forget it. And she looked at me and she smiled broadly and she divided the flowers in half and she gave me half of the flowers. And 20 seconds later, another young woman walked by and I said, excuse me, these are for you. And so in the space of like a few minutes, there were now two young women walking around with two halves of a bouquet of flowers. But it was just, much to my children's dismay, I find interacting with strangers and just sort of testing whether people you don't know are friendly to be one of the most sort of joyful forms of novelty seeking. Because what you find out is that 9 times out of 10, people are extremely friendly and engaged and open to, discovery.
Yeah, and I love this aspect of just doing something unexpected, but then doing something unexpected for somebody else and allowing them to have this kind of experience from your actions. And I think that, what you're doing there in those things is you're putting yourself out there, you're having an open mind, and you're just saying, well, what's going to happen when I talk to this person? And because you have no pre-expectations, anything that happens is just going to be really interesting and memorable. And it is, I think it's a really neat aspect about us that when we go about things in an unexpected way, or we allow ourselves to take in what is unexpected, it can really stimulate our minds in this way that makes us think. The memorable experiences are the interesting ones. They do imprint on our minds in this way that sears them into our memories. And, there's a reason for that. It's because we have shaken up our thought patterns, our expectations, and there's something different there that just taps into our minds and just stays there.
What's the relationship between the interesting, and I always now write this with a capital T, capital I, the interesting and risk?
The relationship between the interesting and risk is really interesting to think about. Through taking risks, we encounter challenges, we encounter novelty, we make things complicated for ourselves. And so risk-taking has those aspects of what makes things interesting. Yet very often, if it's real risk-taking, what you're doing is you're putting yourself at risk. And often when we are putting ourselves literally at risk, what happens is not that we'll find that experience interesting, but that our minds will shut down in the face of risk. It'll be too dangerous. And then our fight and flight mode kicks in, and that doesn't leave us room for interesting experiences. That just makes us run away. So I think it's important to recognize that risk-taking, it shares some benefits of the interesting, but if we go too far, right, and we are genuine risks to our health and safety, those experiences are going to prevent us from having an interesting experience.
Among the charts that are most central in my mind is a wonderful chart in the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the great early positive psychologist and thinker, showing the sweet spot between boredom and anxiety, that we get into flow state. If we're too bored, we're not in flow state. If we're too anxious, we're not in flow state. That there's an ideal zone. And the challenge needs to increase over time in order to remain in flow state, right? Which is one of the reasons that video games are so addictive, and because they're basically, built to keep kids in constant flow state, right? But it seems like the way you talk about the interesting and where we're most likely to find it, that there's something similar going on, that we want some element of risk and challenge, but not too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great model of what we're looking at. We're looking at features of our experiences that'll set us up to have a unique, interesting experience. And the way that I frame the sweet spot for interesting experiences is as the place between our comfort zones and our danger zones. So our comfort zones are great places. They're where we rest and restore and everything is familiar. Yet it's going to be very difficult within our comfort zones to find novelty, to find an interesting experience. At the same time, if we just run straight out of those comfort zones and aren't careful, then we get to these danger zones where we are also unable to have interesting experiences because our mind is too activated towards removing ourselves from the danger. So what I encourage is for folks to really tap into the borders of these zones and recognize when we're shifting into them. So if you're someone who is really kind of clinging to your comfort zone, then the advice for you is to, try to find what you can dip your toes into that'll challenge yourself without going too far. And that line will be different for everybody. These zones are all unique and specific to us. And the key is just to find how we can push that comfort zone, push it enough so that we can have something novel and challenging without, going too far.
And I get the sense reading your book that you have in your past been the young person who was perhaps too interested in risk. You talk about the perils of sensation seeking, and you say, I'm quoting you here, "There's certainly been times in my life when adrenaline was the only thing sustaining me, and I've learned the hard way how important it is to avoid this." I don't want to push you beyond your comfort zone now, but are those experiences something you would share? I mean, you write about, traveling through India, which sounds like it was a transformative experience for you. It sounds like you were somewhat of a risk taker in your youth.
There's certainly times in my youth I traveled a lot. I spent this time in India, which was amazing. Yet there were certainly moments where I was too far out of my comfort zone. I was in a risky situation, and I stayed there. And then, and in the course of that time, I can recognize now that what was really happening then was just this rush of adrenaline that was kept me there and kept me going and experiencing like this. And yet, now that I know this research and I also have this perspective, I know I would have been much better off just by staying a little more close to that, whatever that comfort zone is in India, right? But by not putting myself out there so much, and then being able to really take in the experiences for what they are, which is very complex and challenging, yet in an intellectual way, right? In a way that's stimulating our minds and not just stimulating our adrenaline and our rush.
Right. So you're steering both the reader of your book and perhaps your younger self or even current self towards cognitive risk, intellectual risk, rather than physical, adrenaline-driven risk. I know from reading your book and from our conversation earlier that you and I both love to ski. And I'm in my late 50s now. I just turned 57, so I think I have to say, I used to say mid-50s. I think I have to say late 50s now. But I still like to ski, through the trees and pretty fast. And I catch myself and I say, I'm often, I get a lot of talkings too from my wife on this front. But this is a space in which there's a way to do this. That it's part of the reason that skiing is such an extraordinary experience is that there is an element of risk, right? And these are things that we have to navigate.
Yeah, I love that example too, because skiing, when you are really going fast, right, that adrenaline is kicking in, but then you're just riding high on this adrenaline. And for me, at least, you're certainly not taking anything in. You get to the bottom and you have a rush, yet very often you've just kind of missed out on what's happened along the way. And
yeah.
So I love also thinking about like what goes on when you're skiing through trees, right? When you're in the woods, because that has become my favorite thing to do. As I've grown older and learned more, I'm less interested in the fast stuff and more interested in how amazing it is to be able to ski through woods and to be able to turn and recognize the patterns. And that has just given me a whole new appreciation for the sport that I really didn't get if you're, just cruising down and going as fast as I can through anything.
Yeah. I love this quote you have from Hunter S. Thompson, who says, "Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, 'Wow, what a ride.'" Now, this is probably not the advice we're giving to our kids.
This is not the advice. And, that quote that also tracks a lot for me. When I first found that quote years ago, a big fan of Hunter S. Thompson. And, I thought that was really capturing so well the spirit of what this was about. But then the more that I thought about that, I'm tapping into this kind of like idea of, well, it's not just a ride that leaves us worn out and exhausted, right? There's more to it than that, right? It should be a really interesting, good ride. And the more that you are just worn out and exhausted, then the less able you are to really, harness what you're doing on that ride and really able to enjoy it and take it in. So I love the spirit of it. And yes, I would not encourage my children to go straight there. Yet there is definitely that part about, well, the more we stay and think about life as just kind of going in this little protected zone, we're just not going to really experience life.
Well, while we're talking about Hunter S. Thompson, you're suspicious of drugs as a path to the interesting. You say the fast and easy route just isn't the same. Now, this is a family show in the sense that my wonderful 80-year-old mother listens to it regularly. My teenage sons do not, as far as I can tell. So I'm going to go ahead and say I've tried a lot of different drugs over the course of my life. And to me, it has been part of being a student of the interesting. I don't do any drugs with regularity, but I actually have come to the conclusion that the dividends of drug use have been proportional to the psychological and social risk you are taking, not physical risk. We have teenage boys. Do not take risks. It's a dangerous world out there. But, hallucinogens have been sort of rehabilitated to some degree in the psychological literature. And I think that actually something interesting about hallucinogens is they tend to make us feel vulnerable to some degree, right? And so my thesis here is that the rewards are to some degree proportional to the risk, at least psychologically, of doing something that's maybe a little bit challenging with other people, hopefully, that you care about. Would you disagree with this?
I don't disagree with it. I mean, I, like you, have certainly done my share of drugs and I speak a lot about my use of psychedelics. And so I know what this instinct is, and I know how similar these psychedelic experiences can be to a really robust, interesting experience. Yet there's a sense in which there's a sense in which I still go back to those experiences and I think of them, and they are so removed in a way, right? So many of these experiences, right, they require this kind of dissolution of the self and this submersion in your experience. Yet in that submersion, right, there is this disconnect because you are not taking it in as much, right? You are not there to respond and engage. And while there are many benefits to having psychedelic experiences, they're showing great things with PTSD. So there's many benefits to having this dissolution of the ego that comes with it. Yet the engagement part of it, I feel, is really limited. And so we can have these experiences, but that's why I say they don't really hit like authentic, interesting experiences do. When you're on psychedelics, there's a sense in which they're the drivers of your mind and less about your engagement and your contributions to it.
I'm Tomer Cohen, LinkedIn's Chief Product Officer. If you're just as curious as I am about the way things are built, the insight behind what it takes to create world-renowned products, then join me for my new podcast, Building One. Together, we'll get to learn from leaders around the world, people with diverse backgrounds across multiple industries. Each will share insights into their craft. So listen and follow my new show, Building One, on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And check out the conversation on LinkedIn. It's gonna be great.
To me, everything is in the service of connecting with other humans. And in fact, I have a theory of happiness or what you would call the good life, capital G, capital L as a philosopher, which I would call the only connect hypothesis. Which is, if you had to choose a single decision, a single priority in your life, it would be to connect with other humans. And I think the choice of who we connect with is important because we become our friends to some degree in the long run. But I think the most rewarding friendships are those that celebrate the interesting, right? The intersection of friends, people you care about, and that which is interesting about the world is important, I think. And so do you see these things as, I mean, the interesting is best experienced with company, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting is great whenever you can find it. And through company, though, when you're around other people, and one way in which they really can stimulate interesting experiences is just by kind of getting into each other's mindset, right? When we're with somebody else, we share perspectives and we can tap into the ways in which someone else is thinking about the world. And that can really change how we think about the world. And that's just going to stimulate a very rich experience.
Yeah, there's a sense of play in collecting the interesting and bringing it back to your friends. And in some sense, I think I'm becoming younger, or maybe there's a bell curve of maturity in my case, if you or involved in the sense that my friendships have become more playful and active in the last decade. I have all these text threads with different friends, and we're constantly sharing with each other sort of something we've learned or discovered or a personal experience that we've had on an almost daily basis, right? And I think of it almost like kids in the woods who come back with interesting flowers and mushrooms or whatever, and make a pile of the interesting and then share it and discover together. And that to me is kind of what the aspiration, right? Is that it's a collective endeavor, this discovery of that which is interesting about the world, which is also, I think, a process of trying to understand the world, right? Of building models of the world that help us navigate it more effectively as well.
Yeah. And I love this. Well, I love this analogy with children because, when we're children, we have interesting experiences left and right. Everything is new and novel. And yet somehow, like through all of the adulting, we morph, right? We lose that sense and we lose it with each other, right? We gather with friends with certain just to console each other or to just, have fun, like a pleasurable experience together. But there's so much more that they can offer. And so just going back to that idea of I love this, having a text chain of just like showing, what did I think was interesting? Because even if you're not going to find it interesting yourself, you'll have an interesting time thinking about why your friend thought it was interesting and what was going on with them to think this was interesting.
Why don't we leave people in these final moments with some practical takeaways that can be applied to like how to live a more interesting life? And like among examples that you threw out, you say, get bangs. I guess this means trim your hair such that you have bangs, right? I'm trying to interpret that. To have bangs when you didn't have bangs before, okay.
Yeah, and so just do something different, like today, like right now, right? Pull something out of your closet that you just have never worn, right? I heard from someone else like, well, today I'm going to wear mismatching socks, right? Whatever it does to shake up your experience a little bit by making even a tiny difference. And then notice how that impacts your day, right? When you notice like, oh, I'm wearing these weird socks or how am I getting these reactions from this shirt that I'm wearing? And so do something just different today and
maybe
small.
Maybe two different shoes.
Why
Lorraine.
not?
Maybe we go a little crazy. Like
Totally.
How about running in the rain?
Yes.
How do you feel about running in the rain?
I love running in the rain. It transforms running. And, I think it's one of those things that many people just avoid and it might slow you down. But, there's nothing more exhilarating than having this feeling of just getting soaking wet, making puddles, jumping through them. Talk about bringing your full self and engaging on all fronts. Running in the rain will force yourself to do that.
And this is one of these things that actually, like, provided it's not too cold, right? There's nothing wrong with running in the rain. I actually occasionally in the summertime will just, if it's pouring rain, I actually have a desire to put on running shoes and a bathing suit and take a nice run through town.
That's amazing.
Because it's and there's something particularly when everybody's cowering with umbrellas, to be sort of delighting in the rainfall, is kind of a wonderful thing to do.
Yep. Open mind, that makes that happen.
Well, Lorraine, thank you so much for being with us today. Such a delightful conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Rufus. This was great to be here and really interesting to talk with you today.
It's the good life, full of fun, seems to be the ideal. Yes, the good life lets you hide all the sadness you feel.
Lorraine Besser's new book, The Art of the Interesting, is out now. Before I go, I want to make a quick plug for our new Substack. It's called Book of the Day. Just Google Book of the Day Substack and it comes right up. Sign up and you will receive the 5 key insights from a new book every day, 5 days a week, written and read by the authors themselves. This, folks, is a gumball machine of the interesting, a jukebox, a poo-poo platter. Join the Book of the Day on Substack for a new book in 10 to 15 minutes in your inbox every morning. If they tickle your fancy, discuss them with us. We're always in there, and share them with a friend. I know I'm biased, but I love it. And I think you'll love it too, which is why we're offering you 50% off a subscription when you follow the link in the episode notes. You can also try it for free. A personal thank you today to my dear friends, fellow appreciators of the interesting, text threaders Serge, Hars, and Warm. Today's episode was produced by Caleb Bissinger, sound designed by Mike Toda. Working with the team at the LinkedIn Podcast Network is always interesting. I'm Rufus Griscom. More to come.